Should we be optimistic about the future? Does the US have any responsibility in the Libyan slave trade? Are we governed by criminals? Find out all the answers to these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This, of course, is the show where we scourge the internet for various posts and we find out if they're good or bad and talk about them. In either case, highlight the good posts and maybe take the bad posts down a few notches. My name is Donald and I'm here with my co-host Britt. Before we get started, just a reminder to like and share and subscribe, all that good stuff. We appreciate all the interaction and listens and growth and stuff we've had over the past year. So just want to keep that trend on an upward curve. We really, really appreciate all that you do to help us and to support us. And we love doing this. And so we're going to keep on going. So without further ado, let's look at this first take. And the post we'll talk about here is a quote retweet, which the original tweet is showing Tulsi Gabbard interviewing the representative-elect from New York, George Santos. Santos, of course, had claimed to have all kinds of background information that he ended up not having, most notably claiming that he was Jewish. And I think probably in one of my favorite defenses ever, he claimed, no, I wasn't saying I was Jewish. I was saying I was Jew-ish, which is probably the funniest thing anyone has ever said.
I didn't see that. That is nuts. Like, that's any better that he said it that way.
It's so good. Anyway, so Tulsi, who is filling in for Tucker Carlson, to Santos, these are blatant lies. Do you have no shame? And the quote tweet reads, "You know you've screwed up bad when you let a Putin and Assad apologist lecture you about integrity." Now, of course, the Putin and Assad apologist in this case that they're referring to would be Tulsi Gabbard. So, Britt, what do you think about the ethics of this and the title they decided to give former Representative Gabbard?
Yeah. The quote retweet is a bad take for sure. I mean, it's so funny to me that the left, how quickly they turn on their own when their own is anti-war, in any way. Which ironically kind of drove, now Tulsi Gabbard's hosting Tucker Carlson's show on Fox News, when, just however many years ago, she was a Democratic, presidential candidate, or primary candidate. People get on Tulsi for being like, oh, well, you just, you don't care about the United States. You don't care about its safety. You don't want to keep us safe, or you're a terrorist sympathizer. You met with Assad. It's like, Tulsi Gabbard was a freaking combat medic, right? Like, of anyone that I'm going to listen to about whether we should or should not go into another country and invade, if I'm counting, if I want to listen to someone who understands the costs of that truly, Tulsi Gabbard understands those costs better than probably anyone else that I've ever talked to would understand them. And she's, very much anti-war, very much interested in making sure that we don't needlessly waste American lives. And she's very familiar with the consequences of the things that we've done when we do intervene, and the results that happen when we do intervene in other places. So, the Tulsi Gabbard, Ron Paul, all these folks that are anti-war, their point about Putin and Assad and Gaddafi and all these people, we have a Libya take later. But their point is like, hey, like, why would we not want to try to give diplomacy a chance, right? So, like, Tulsi wants to go over, meets with Assad, trying to talk through things. Like, I would rather do that than, go straight to, bombing people, or in the case of, Putin and Ukraine, potential nuclear war that destroys the world. Like, don't you think you should at least talk about this? And because she says that, and it's so against the military-industrial complex, who, all of the politicians are in bed with, they have to vilify her, which is makes this a bad take. And this person's doing the beat bop NPC deal because that's what they've been told to say about Tulsi.
What's almost worse is I picked this one up from a retweet. The quote tweet was retweeted by a Beltway libertarian type. So,
oh no! So, like, agreeing with it.
Yes, agreeing with it, saying like, "Wow, isn't this incredible?" So, I think part of it too is the Putin and Assad apologist label on Tulsi really shows that a lot of people will sacrifice their principle if it is not politically popular, if it doesn't put you in the respectable crowds, if it doesn't make you seem posh or with the times. The thing is, people accuse Tulsi Gabbard of a lot of things, in particular now that she, left the Democratic Party officially, became independent, has long been going on Fox News for the past several years, saying things like, "Oh, she's just a grifter opportunist who's taking advantage of the anti-war sentiment on the right and using it to then just insulting Democrats from their own team or whatever, and so she'll get all the Republicans to like her." But her legacy on this has been pretty good. If anything, she recently, unfortunately, has gone more pro-war than I would like, and maybe that is more of a symbol towards maybe selling out to a side or a team. But most of the actual complaints I see about her are things like this, like the Putin or Assad apologist angle, which is so stupid because she's been anti-war since she was a representative in representing Hawaii in the U.S. Congress, probably on the House level as well. Although I don't know her record there. She spoke and what gave the speech for Bernie Sanders, I believe, back in when he was running the first time as a nominee. I think she gave his introduction speech during the nominating convention. She's a long time, and part of the reason she endorsed Bernie Sanders was because she was very anti-war, and he stood up to the machine allegedly on anti-war things. Although again, his voting record's not great on that now. But her track record on things like being anti-war, pretty good. If anything, in recent days, it's gotten a little bit less good because she's gotten a little more pro-war, saying things like, "I don't believe in regime change wars." And it's like, well, good. Let's maybe scale that up a little bit. But the Putin and Assad apologist line is just a neoconservative, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, slander, because she would rather try to find diplomacy instead of, funding arms dealers to wage war across the world.
I find it funny too, that public enemy number one, Donald Trump, the only time they ever called him, very presidential was when he launched missiles into Syria. Yep. For those who aren't familiar, Assad is the president, quote unquote, of Syria, who Tulsi met with. So, we have like I said earlier, we have a Libya take later, but it's just always interesting to me how we turn a blind eye against certain types of Middle Eastern countries that are doing the same exact thing that Assad is doing in Syria and Gaddafi was doing in Libya, and the very things we accuse Putin of, we are guilty of ourselves. But we still anyone that points that out or anyone that's against that or doesn't fit with that narrative, like Tulsi, gets kind of excommunicated and pushed out, and the NPCs get their updated software to scream, she's an apologist. The one good part about this take, I don't want to take it away, is that, this person referring to George Santos saying, you've screwed up bad. That's correct. George Santos sucks. He's a liar. And I mean, as most Republican politicians or any politicians are, he's awful. So they got that part right.
Well, I was going to say about the hypocrisy of, oh man, it's so hypocritical that she's criticizing him for lying when she lies. Okay, but if you're talking about hypocrisy about lying for things, and then you're going to bring up Assad, where's all of the shame from the numerous sources that told us and assured us Assad was gassing his own people? I mean, come on. Assad is a terrible dude. No one wants to take away from that. He is a dictator and he is brutal, and I think he is probably an evil human to the core. But that doesn't mean you can justify lying about things that make no sense in order to bomb his country and to try to assert more Western dominance in the region. There was absolutely zero follow-up, zero accountability for the people who lied about Assad gassing his own people, only ever used it as a justification to try to push us to the brink of war with Syria and generally assert more control in the region. And there's, okay, so you're mad about Tulsi, visiting and talking to Assad and then saying, hey, he probably didn't gas his own people. We need to verify that before we act on it. You're mad about that. And you're like, oh man, you've screwed up bad when that person is lecturing you about integrity. It's like, okay, but you're making an apology for the people who told us that Assad gassed his own people and then had no integrity there. So yeah, how about everyone in politics sucks? How about that?
Yeah.
And maybe stop going with whatever's trendy, like insulting Tulsi for being an Assad apologist, and maybe actually, like, I don't know, point your anger and malice towards things that really count. Maybe things like a mainstream media that wants to get us into war. Okay, moving to our next take here. This was a Facebook post that I found reading. And this, to be clear, this comes from a liberty-minded individual. So just so that perspective is clear. It's time to get optimistic about the future. If we want to win, we must become optimistic. Otherwise, we're playing into the hands of the anti-human worldview that needs us demoralized to remain in control. Take the white pill. We will beat them. No more nihilism. It's time to win. What are your thoughts on that, Britt? Because it's not a policy take, obviously.
It's not a policy. Yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the pill take, there's the red pill, there's the blue pill, kind of from the Matrix, and the red pill wakes you up. And then there's the white pill and the black pill, not really from the Matrix, but just in terms of white pills like, hey, I'm optimistic. Things are getting better. The curve of history bends towards liberty, and it is always getting better, and we're on a path there. And then the black pill is like, hey, we're doomed, nuclear war, everyone's going to end, we will all be enslaved, kind of the sad side of things. So I think you and I, Donnie, both kind of fit on the white pill side of things. Like my human nature predispositions me towards being somewhat nihilistic, but I strive each day to be optimistic, to be a happy warrior, to believe that, we will get better. And that, history, if I wanted to pick any time and place in history to live, it would be today. And so if that's the case, then that must mean things are getting better. Right. And so I really like this. I don't think the liberty movement, I don't think humans are served by being needlessly, like he said, nihilistic. I think it's good for us to be optimistic. I think it's also really good for us to be honest and truthful that certain things are bad. I'm not saying we'd be Pollyanna about stuff, but I think this is a great take, and I wish more people were like this, because I think it gives you a lot of it makes you more persuasive. The power of your persuasion is better when you are hopeful and optimistic about the future, because ultimately that's where we all want to go. And anyone who doesn't want to go that path, they're usually pretty easy to beat in a debate or in discussion.
I think this is a marvelous take on a number of levels. I think when you become defeatist, you play into the hands of people who want to control things. Because if your idea is, let's say, human liberty is good, human liberty provides flourishing, as we generally do, and I'm not even saying this, you specifically have to be a libertarian. Even, I would say, broadly speaking, people who believe in relative levels of freedom, so whether you're Republican or maybe even somewhat of a liberty Democrat, if that exists, if you believe that liberty, generally speaking, is better than overprotection from these, regulators who want to control how you live, if you constantly act in a way that is defeatist, that you're never going to win, then all you end up doing is burying your head in the sand and allowing there to be more room for people who want to control things to control. If you're not putting up a fight because you believe you can win, then you're actively retreating and you're actively ceding that ground. So even if you don't know that you can win, you have to be white-pilled. You have to be optimistic for your own sake, for your children's sake, for the future in general. What kind of a world would it be if you acted as though the world was going to end in 5 years? You wouldn't be making long-term investments for yourself. You wouldn't be making long-term investments for your children. You wouldn't be making long-term investments for your community and the world you live in. And that is, as any sort of generally responsible person knows, a terrible way to live. You want your time preference to benefit the future, because not only is that just better down the road, but it's exponentially better down the road. And I think that mentality needs to get carried into the political fight as well. If you're operating and living in a way that it's all doomed, we're all defeatist anyway, then you're not going to be making long-term investments, and that just makes everyone else worse off. And so even if it's going to get worse in the short term, we have to believe that it's going to get better in the long term. Otherwise, you sort of forfeit. It's your own written out demise because of your own authorship.
That's a great point about when people get demoralized, their time preference for decisions economically, personally, all sorts of ways, obviously gets shortened, right? Whether they know it or not, their subconscious might make them make choices that are not as good long term. But because history does go on, right, and there are people in control, like you, by making decisions that don't have high time preference, that make you, that are short sighted, you actually give up your freedom because now you haven't planned for the future. You haven't taken into account what's coming down the road. And so now you're dependent. You're forced to either continue working when you shouldn't be working. I know some people that are working well into their, late 70s because for one reason or another, they didn't make such great decisions early on in life. They didn't save. I mean, it all comes back to even like the Federal Reserve, right? Like they penalize saving. They want everyone to feel demoralized, sad. Oh, my money doesn't buy as much as it used to. I can't afford a house anymore. I'm a millennial and I'm never going to be able to buy property or anything like that. Because they want you not saving. They want you not preparing for the future, because if you don't prepare for the future, then you are dependent on them to give you what you need or what you perceive you need. And that means that you're going to continue to work and be their slave at the end of the day, right? And so you're right. On multiple dimensions, this is a really great take because the anti-human worldview, the view that humans need to be controlled, that authority needs to be smashed down, and people need to have their decisions made for them, does want them demoralized because then they are easy to control.
Yeah, and the last thing I would add is I don't know if the individual here what their worldview is entirely, other than I know he's a good libertarian, but this view rings true as well if you are theologically inclined to the way that Britt and I are as Christians, because there's lots of theology within end times and things like that, and there's a lot of worldviews, pre-mill, post-mill, a-mill, all that kind of stuff if you want to get into the weeds of it. But even in a worldview that would say that the world is going to die of moral decay before Jesus comes back, even if you're living in that world, that's the end of the story isn't the world dies in decay. The end of the story is Jesus returns, right?
Sure.
So even in sort of the I don't know what you would, not defeatist per se, but maybe pessimistic worldview within a Christianity, I don't think that you can live in such a way that is the black pill doomer, everything is terrible and it's only going to get worse way to live. That might be true on one level, but in the eternal perspective, that isn't true. So I think whether you agree with the history bending towards human liberty, even if you disagree with that, if you are theologically inclined towards Christianity, you have to admit that ultimately history will be resolved and Jesus wins. So yeah. I don't think there's any point to being black pilled other than it feels good and human nature does want to pull you that way.
Are you a Parks and Rec fan?
Yeah, I've seen it before. I enjoy some. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know that episode with Zorg or whatever, the world burner? So like there's these folks. It's funny, man. It plays right into this. So there are these folks who are like a cult that believe this deity named Zorg will come back and burn the earth or whatever. So every year they reserve the park, for their Zorg to return.
Right.
He never ends up returning. And so Ron Swanson always makes some like flutes for them and stuff. And they're like, will you take a check, instead of money? Because they think obviously like, oh, it's going to be worthless tomorrow. And then Ron's like, okay, I'll charge you $100, per flute or whatever. And that's a great illustration of the time preference, right? If you believe that the world's ending tomorrow, like who cares? I'll spend all my money and do stupid things. But yeah,
that's great.
Both in our worldview though, when the God of our faith returns, it's still great. It's a white pill. It's not the world burns. So yeah, he's got that one on Zorg among many other things.
All right, moving on to our next take. This one is a reply to a tweet of a video. So the first tweet with the video reads, "For those of you who praise Joe Biden and Obama and yes, Hillary Clinton, it is their policy that is responsible for slavery in Libya. And they have never condemned the brutality." And there's a reply. And this is the take we will be looking at today. And this take reads, "This is a serious problem in almost every African and Middle Eastern country. It's horrendous. But look at what is happening in Ukraine right now, where thousands of civilians are being slaughtered or starved or frozen by the brutal Russian regime. we just can't save everyone.
Oh man.
Okay, so where are you going with this take, Brett? It's almost, I mean,
It's a difficult one.
Yeah, it almost sounds non-interventionist at the end there, but the way you get there's a little bit roundabout. I'm not sure.
I think it's a bad take. I don't think it's non-interventionist because it's basically saying like, oh man, we're the heroes and we're stretched so thin,
yes,
by trying to save Ukraine. And if we could, we should go save the folks in Libya. This person is completely ignorant of the history of Libya, which is we, quote unquote, went in to save people in Libya, and we created and destabilized the region in such a way that the video that the person is a woman in chains. She's going to be sold at a slave market. It's a really disturbing video. We destabilized it in such a way that became possible. That was not there before, as Hillary Clinton put it, we saw he died when she talked about, Gaddafi. And what's funny about this, is we justified going into Libya the same way that we justified going into Iraq, the same way that we justified launching missiles into Syria, these Middle Eastern countries that all conveniently decided that they didn't want to be on the, the petrodollar, that not conveniently, coincidentally decided they weren't going to be on the petrodollar anymore. We said, oh, they're going to use, gas attacks, or they're using chemical weapons on their people, whether it's the Kurds or for Gaddafi, the during the civil war there in Libya, or, like you were talking about with Assad in Syria. It's like, man, none of that stuff is true. Or maybe, and it's not necessarily untrue that these guys aren't evil people, right? But in a lot of ways, like when the U.S. intervenes, like in World War I, we destabilize the balance of power so much so that awful things happen. Even if we went in with good intentions, which I don't think we did go in with good intentions to Libya, really, really bad results happen out of that. So when we killed Gaddafi, huge power vacuum. We never even went in to try and fix it more, which, good or bad. I mean, we made a huge, absolute mess in there. And now you've got open air slave markets, which didn't exist there before we got involved there. So it's a complete sham to think that the United States can be the policeman of the world, that we can actually save anyone. It's I can't remember who is it. Thomas Sowell who did the quote that's the most terrifying thing you can hear is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Oh, that actually might be a Reaganism, actually.
Is that a Reaganism? Okay,
it might have been. I know he at least said it at one point, but maybe he got it somewhere else.
Okay, well, good for Reagan for saying that. I wish he lived that out.
I do too.
But I'd say actually the most terrifying thing is, oh, we're from the United States and we're here to help. To someone in some foreign country, because it's like, oh my gosh, we're going to be bombed back into a third world country. We can't save people in other countries. Even if we had the best of intentions, which we don't, it doesn't work out almost ever.
Yeah, this is funny because the argument that this is a serious problem in almost every African and Middle Eastern country, in some perspectives, that argument is justified and rational, right? To think, okay, let's zoom back. Is this a problem that exclusively exists because of the United States? And if you're talking about something like the American institution of slavery, then this kind of analysis makes a lot of sense, right? To say, actually, the slave markets came from Africa. The tribal enslavements had been going on there forever. The American slave trade was brutal. It was evil, also not uniquely from the West. In fact, started from those countries. But the specific reality here, as you illustrated, is that these slave markets didn't exist in Libya. So sure, it is a serious problem that happens in most every African and Middle Eastern country, but it didn't happen in Libya until the US came in.
Yeah.
So that, that's like going to a neighborhood and every house on the block has a pipe leak. And then you go to the one house that doesn't and you puncture the pipes, with a tool, and it starts leaking. And then someone's like, dude, why did you come and puncture my house's pipe? You're like, look, this is a serious problem, but it exists for everyone on the block.
Yeah.
So relax. I can't fix every single pipe. And it's like, yeah, but you went in and punctured this one. It doesn't matter if it existed everywhere, if you specifically created the problem here, which this person is saying. So the second tweet, or the reply tweet, is almost a whataboutism rather than anything else. It doesn't address the actual problem. And then it goes into a complete red herring with the Ukraine situation. Russia is not a great actor. Russia is doing terrible things to Ukraine. We also intervened there, right?
Yeah.
We also have a history there that caused a lot of this. Whether or not and if the U.S. had withdrawn, would Russia and Ukraine be at each other's throats? We don't really know, but all we know is that the U.S. certainly didn't help. We certainly stoked flames. We certainly put a lot of pressure on Russia to do these kinds of things. So, I'm not directly saying that without U.S. presence, Russia wouldn't have done this thing, but it certainly didn't help, and it may have, in many cases, seems very likely that we did push this to the exact position where we're in now. So, also a bad example to bring up. So yeah, I think this is a pretty crappy take.
Did you ever watch the Amazon series Jack Ryan?
No, actually, my wife was just saying that she was starting to watch it and enjoyed it. Actually,
I think you would like it.
1 and 2,
yeah. So season 2 is okay. Season 1 is pretty good, and then over Christmas I started watching season 3 because they just released it. But they do, he's obviously CIA operative and all this stuff. The enemy basically to you and I in a lot of ways. But they get a lot of things right in there, which is specifically the blowback theory. In that, like the villain in the first, and this is the first scene. So if you ever watch it, this is the first thing you'll see.
Okay.
But the villain in the first season, his brother is killed by, a U.S. drone strike, and that radicalizes him to become, the terrorist that he is. And it's really well done in that they give some dimension to these characters. Definitely an evil dude, but it's like, oh, I get why he's there. It's not just because he was like popped out of the womb and he's like, I'm gonna blow up some buildings, or anything like that. It's like, oh, there was something happened that changed that trajectory. And then in the third season, and this is also in the very opening, like NATO, it's set in Europe, and NATO put some, I think it's in the Czech Republic, put some anti-aircraft missiles, in there that can also be converted to like long-range missiles, Tomahawk missiles. Which actually happened, right? I was talking with my dad, and I was like, no, what happened here, the situation that they created in fictional, Jack Ryan universe that made Russia all scared and everything, like that actually happened in real life. And so, and they used it, and what's funny in that show is they use that as a justification, like, well, we need to protect the Czech Republic. Like they deserve to have their rights, to have the right to not be bombed or whatever. And so never underestimate the amount of lies and deceit that the military-industrial complex will try to sell you to move more of their missiles, create more chaos, create more war, create more bloodshed. Because at the end of the day, if those things are going on, they're moving product. And their product is weapons of death and destruction.
It's funny because people, I think, sometimes take issue with the idea of blowback. They say things either like wow, we're just painting the U.S. as the bad guy and as we're the only thing we're doing evil. And or to say, well, if we didn't do that, would how could we keep people safe? The benefits worth it. And in both of those scenarios, I just need people to think about and acknowledge that you don't even have to agree with me to say that it's not worth it. But at least you have to acknowledge that there can be situations where the collateral damage you cause is greater than the solution you are providing. So to say, if you were to bomb a house that had one bad dude in it, but had the central power generator to every single hospital in the United States, and the moment you bomb that house, you kill you kill Gaddafi, you kill Assad, whatever evil person you want to put in there, you kill Hitler himself. But then literally every single hospital loses power in the United States, and they can't switch that up. You'd have to recognize that maybe it's not wise to just go in there blowing things up because there's a bad dude involved. So if you can take that principle and understand that obviously not every decision is this cut and dry, black and white, but there can be situations where that you cause negative repercussions from doing what is purportedly a good thing, or in what I would argue is more cases, what is argued to be a good thing is not actually a good thing, and then you just end up causing destruction without a real accounting of the consequences, or a calculated accounting of the consequences that let you cause more destruction because you're baiting that kind of violence.
Yes.
And don't think that that's beyond the government. Again, my favorite in the sense that it's so clear and demonstrable, is FDR with World War II and the Japanese baiting them to bomb the Hawaii Navy or
Pearl Harbor.
At Pearl Harbor. Just absolute awful stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking over the holidays. My favorite thing to bring up to kind of like shatter the illusion that the CIA and the FBI and the NSA and all these folks have our best interest and protect us. I bring up Operation Northwoods.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, well, what is that? It's like, oh yeah, like the Joint Chiefs of Staff told Kennedy that they wanted to, do all sorts of weird things like loading civilians up into airlines and shooting them down, near Cuba and framing Cuba so that we could invade there, among other things. And it always blows people's minds, right? That like, oh, like the generals who were taught to venerate and respect, and they're the ones that, keep us safe at night. We're actually plotting to, kill some of our own civilians in order to justify an invasion of a foreign country that had nothing to do with it, to frame them. And that opens the door to talk about all sorts of other things, right? So, they're going to justify, any sort of we need to save people. If they're saying that, and they're not talking about the current things that we're doing in other places that are killing millions of people, Yemen, Iraq, all these places, be really skeptical of that, because they're probably trying to get you to do something, and they're pulling at your heartstrings in order for them to justify taking more of your money.
Okay, moving to our next take here. This one comes from the Alabama Mises Caucus, tweeting out this quote from Adam Kokesh. The quote reads, "Anybody who questions authority and questions our current government inevitably comes to the conclusion that we are governed by criminals and we have to fundamentally change the system." All right, and what do you think about that quote?
I think it's pretty good.
Adam Kokesh is a little loony, but
he's a little loony. I haven't heard anything from him for a long time now, but yeah. I like everything about it except the last one, which is change the system, because that kind of, I don't necessarily know a ton about his anarchist leanings or anything like that, but fundamentally change the system seems a little bit more minarchist, like, oh, it can be salvaged in a way. So that's my only nitpick on it.
I agree the wording is that way, but he's his whole platform that he ran on was his first act would be to abolish the government.
Okay. So he's good then.
He's full on anarchist. Also, not my favorite representative of anarchism.
Sure.
He's gone a little unhinged and off the crazy end. Okay. But yes, he does not mean it in that way. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a great take then. Yes. I think that I love having conversations with people that trust my heart and intention. And they trust that like we both want the same type of world to result, like a good world to result from whatever actions we take. Because then I can start poking holes at the preconditioned public school society conditioning that people have, which is that, oh, the government is good and that we need to respect the people that are in power and they have our best interest in mind. And it doesn't take very long, of pulling that thread on that sweater for it to completely unravel for people. So I think Adam is totally spot on right here. Like, yeah, question authority, like question why these people should have a say in your life. Just ask yourself that, like, this person that you've never met, knows nothing about you, doesn't really even live in the state, city, county, town that you live in, doesn't know anything about your family or personal situation. Why do they have the opportunity and the power to change how you live and how much of your money gets taken away from you? That's a good question to ask, because that's how it is right now, right? And then on top of that, like, why does that person have the ability to send my child to war, right? Why does that person have the ability to take dollars from my neighbor and give it to someone in Ukraine? All of these different questions inevitably lead to like, oh, like there are other interests at play here. There are other priorities, and basically none of them are good. None of them are awesome. None of them are moral. None of them are ethical. They all lead to people trying to unjustly enrich themselves at the expense of the innocent.
Yeah, and I think, I think with the quote, with the end part, even if you were to take that into more minarchist leanings, I think that the quote is actually still good, because
sure,
I think you don't even have to convince most people into total abolition of the government for them to start seeing things like, oh wait, the people in charge actually aren't the ones who should be there. And then you just have to kind of keep proving that and saying, well, what about what makes you think that the right people can be in charge there? And like, well, were the right people in charge there in the beginning? Because if they weren't there in the beginning, then what hope would there be for it there to be now? If when the government was smaller, self-contained, and I think a lot of conservatives tend to view history with a little bit of a rose-colored lenses. So you look at the writings of Tocqueville or something, where he's talking about how every American is sort of a Renaissance man, and every American, is a doctor and a lawyer and a mathematician or whatever. Every American knows all these things. They're all well studied in this, and so it's like, if you have that kind of a society and we end up with a government the way that it's run now, then that means, as I love the quote that Michael Malice says all the time, either the Constitution, was meant to create this kind of government, or was powerless to stop it from being created. And so, so regardless of your initial thoughts on anarchism or whatever, the bottom line is, we look at the government, we look at the current state of things, and you have to recognize that there is something fundamentally wrong. And then the question is, how did we get this way? And I think the more you go back, the more you realize it's just a byproduct of the design of power concentrations, a byproduct of unfettered monopolies that have no ability to be challenged by an outsider. And that's what the government is. Everyone complains about monopolies in the private sector, but the only way that monopolies can stay in the private sector without a challenge is if the government, which is the only real monopoly out there, forces out competitors out of the scene. Otherwise, the monopolies have to serve the interests of the consumers better than anyone else. But the government doesn't have to do that. And I think that the other aspect too is, even if you're not totally sold on the idea of anarchism, if you were to look at the functions of government when it was originally set up in the United States in particular, if you were to preserve those original institutions, you would have the skeleton of the government we have now. You would have an absolute bare bones, minimalistic framework of what authority is, to the point where I think even most, Republicans nowadays would probably say, well, that's just too small to function because of whatever reason. And so it's like, it's kind of funny because even when you try to, I think the argument against anarchism with minarchists or with just small government types is, well, we just need to reduce the size. But I genuinely believe if you actually reduce the size to what it was originally intended, the small government types would think, well, we need certainly more than that.
Yeah. I can't remember the exact scaling for it, but basically, if you scaled the way the House of Representatives was back in when it was originally formed, I think it'd be there'd be 30,000 representatives or something like that because of the population. We're 360 million folks now, and I can't even remember how many we were back when the country was founded. But that the amount of power was supposed to be really, really distributed. So even at the monarchist size, you're saying, it looks drastically different. There's a lot better chance that you probably actually know your congressman, in some way. Probably goes to, you'd see him at the grocery store and stuff, because there'd be, 1,000 times more of them.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great example. Is not only is the scope of the government so much different, but by the very nature of how it operates, it is fundamentally a different beast. The reality is, they twist the rules so that they can follow the letter of the law in the least contrived or in the most contrived way possible. Think about the fact that as long as you have a residence, and it is your quote primary residence in a state, then you can be an elected politician for that area. I mean, Mitt Romney was the governor of Massachusetts, and then he was a senator from Utah. And there was never, when the Constitution was written and when the government was formed originally, there was no sense that these people weren't going to be tied to the land of their fathers and their forefathers. And sure, you could move out west and that's great, but the idea was you were planting roots and you were going to make a community and you were going to be a part of that community. You're not going to be like, oh, the rich guy just bought property here and he lives here 186 days of the year, therefore it's his primary residence, and him living here 186 days is also not counting the days he's in DC, where he's not living here. And now there are these pseudo celebrities. And obviously in 1913, you have the amendment which allowed income tax for the federal government, which was never supposed to be a thing, because the idea was not some foreign entity full of people who don't know you, who don't live where you live, would be able to directly tax you and your earnings. At the very broadest level, that was supposed to be done at the state level, at least in the sort of the rural, not rural, but the communities and the local, that's the more local kinds of taxing authorities would have a better idea of what was fair and what was balanced. But now we have it completely separated, completely removed. So there's absolutely no way you can look at the current government and think, this is how it was meant to be. This is how it is meant to be. And the people running it are good and in charge. And I think the more you peel away at those layers, the more you do realize that the system does have to fundamentally change. But I think more than fundamentally change, I think it has to fundamentally be maybe exploded.
Yeah, in such a way that it doesn't resemble the system that it was before.
Yes, exactly right. Okay, and last take for today. We have Nina Turner, so it's going to be a good one. Unfettered capitalism will not solve poverty that it created. What do you think?
I mean, it's such a bad take. It's always weird to me how these leftists that are very socialist, communist leaning, they feel like that poverty is not the default state, right? Like, we're born into this world and everyone's born into a mansion and a yacht and food for the rest of their 80 years here on this planet. And then somehow, unfettered capitalism, the evil boogeyman in the corner, comes in and takes it all away, right from the get-go. It's like, no, like, people are born into a world with nothing, save what is given to them by their parents, who had also nothing and was given to them by their parents, which eventually ends up someone had to earn it, right? Someone had to create something. Someone had to produce value somewhere. The question, we've talked about this before, is not why is there poverty, but why is there no poverty? Why is there abundance? Why is there actual things out there? And that's what capitalism is, right? It's the creation of wealth. It's using stored up excess profit capital to create more things, to reinvest. Nina Turner, always has these takes, and it makes it easy to say this is a bad one. And whenever we're looking for a bad one, I always go through her page because there's going to be one. But this is a pretty common misconception, right? Even people that don't think about this very often think, oh, we live in capitalism here in the United States. We have free markets, and then they see things that are socialism, which are bankrupting people, hurting other people, redistributing money, making it hard for people to actually earn an income. Not being able to afford a house. I think, oh, well, that's capitalism and it's creating poverty. It's making us more poor off. It's like, no, what it's doing is it's taking what capitalism produced and it's destroying it. It's actually trying to create poverty. Like, socialism is trying to create poverty that capitalism, had once eliminated.
Yeah, I think that when you look at real world examples, it's very easy to poke holes into any example they give. And one of my favorite is, I've probably brought this up before, but when you look in the post-slave world of the United States, a lot of people point to that and talk about how there were businesses that were exclusionary to blacks and to African Americans and to recently freed slaves and their descendants. And it took laws to fix that. But when you look at closer, yes, there was lots of prejudice in the country still. And that is true, and that is ugly. But was it the free market, or was it the government that was better at imposing racism for everyone? Because you look at Jim Crow laws. So Jim Crow laws were passed as a way to prevent people from growing and expanding and treating people with decency. They gave a justified reason for violence against other humans. Second, you look at something like, okay, so these stores refuse to sell to black people. Well, guess what? In a free market, that means that there's a whole market that isn't being served. And people like the Sears catalog took advantage of that. So the Sears catalog started mailing out these ways that you could order the products that, the black Americans wanted to buy, but weren't allowed to in stores that were racist. So they could order them from this catalog. And that was a huge market share. So then what happened was the postal service, a government institution, wanted to put a stop to that because they were racist. And so then the Sears catalogs started including instructions on how to bypass the checks that the postal service would put in to try to take out their orders and things like that, so that they could get the stuff from them. Because free markets mean exchange. And at the end of the day, eventually, it doesn't take a ton of people to say, this kind of bigotry is stupid. This person wants something I have, and they have something I want. Let's exchange. And they do it. And the more trade and the more exchange you have, generally between nations, the more peace you have. And I think that's true within humans as well. If I have someone who I'm really not a fan of, but they're selling something and I want to buy it, we're not going to come to blows if we're exchanging two things that we equally value more than what we have. And that's a better way to achieve kind of harmony on a micro level than government saying, we're going to make a law about that you have to like this person. That doesn't work, and quite often gets put in the reverse, where we're going to make a law where you can enact violence on this other person.
Yeah, I'd never heard that example about the Sears catalog. I mean, we're at 114 episodes now.
Yeah,
that one hasn't come up. So that was a good one, man. I like that one.
Yeah, it's a really fun kind of story that you don't hear very often, because it's not exactly politically popular to say things like free markets actually helped Americans in a post-slave slave world where racism was abundant.
It's kind of going back to Nina Turner's post, and back to the concept of like, oh, capitalism creates poverty. It's like we always use this example, but you're born on an island and you see coconuts around you and you're starving. It's like you're in poverty. Like you have no food, you have no ability to, you have nothing to your name at that point. So how do you get out of poverty? It's like, well, you work, you get coconuts, you store them up. Maybe you reinvest those coconuts so that you can eventually spend time building a machine to harvest more coconuts. It's like, oh, well, that's capitalism. Like capitalism gets people out of poverty. Nina Turner's correct in that there is poverty being created, but it's poverty that is being created through the elimination of capitalism, not vice versa.
That's exactly right. Well, unless you have any other additions, I think we're good
on that one. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us. As a reminder, if you click the like button, if you're watching this on YouTube, or subscribe, or leave us a 5-star review on any podcast platform review channel there, that's helpful for us. And we will continue to make these episodes throughout 2023, and we're looking forward to it. So we'll see you on the next one.